It's Ramsey Dewey over here in Shanghai, China. Welcome to another edition of Q&A with the Coach. Today we have a question from Surfside who says, do you sell a video for, say, the best 6 BJJ techniques to use in a violent situation where someone is attacking you or about to attack you? I'm a much older guy and would have difficulty against a younger person, so I need something that I could use for defense and offense. I don't have the inclination or interest or stamina to go to a BJJ school and train with the kids. I'm way past 60 years old. Thanks. All right, Surfside, first of all, I'd recommend watch the podcast I did with Matt Grant, who started Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in his mid-50s. He is now a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He is a multiple-time world IBJJF champion at blue belt level, purple belt level, and also brown belt level. The dude is an absolute stud, and yeah, also an older gentleman. Now, mid-50s, yeah, that's different than 60. I get it. But again, he started late, so I definitely recommend watching that podcast for some tips and advice about starting Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu later in life. Do I sell a video? No, I don't sell anything. Fitness is free, my friends. Fitness is free. That being said, martial arts schools cost money to run, so respect that and pay your dues, my friends. Pay your dues. But the information I offer here online, totally free. If you want to support the channel financially, yeah, sure, let me know about that. Support my sponsors, go check them out. xmartial.com, use my code Ramsey10 for 10% off everything on the website. They kick back some of that to me. It's much appreciated. Now, as far as 6 simple Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu techniques, more important than techniques are principles. Now, as far as self-defense goes, where Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is going to come in handy is getting you out of bad positions that you're going to end up in, regardless of your best efforts. If you can reliably improve position from the following places: full mount, somebody climbs on top of you, they straddle you, they're riding or sitting on top of your chest or your waist, and they're in a position to strike, strangle, or otherwise hurt you. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu teaches you game plans to go from the bottom to the top or get back up on your feet and turn the tables in that situation. That's imperative. Is there one simple little thing I could show you? I could show you how it's done, and I have many times on this channel. But unless you actually get out there and train against variable levels of resistance, it won't do you any good. The second one, side control. When somebody, again, is on top of you in a chest-to-chest position, but they're angled off to the side about 90 degrees. Maybe this is you, this is them on top of you, they're squishing you. There's a whole bunch of weight right there, because instead of pinning your whole body, it's their whole body weight just against your shoulders, your neck, head, chest area, and it can feel overwhelming. And you can become demoralized very quickly getting stuck in that position. So it's imperative that you learn techniques to improve your position from there, get out from underneath, get back up, etc. What's another one? Knee mount. Somebody's kneeling on you. Somebody's kneeling on you in a position where they can just tee off on you with impunity. You need to know how to improve your position from there. Notice I'm not saying escape, but rather improve your position. Back mount. Somebody is behind you. They've got a good hold of you. They're on you like a backpack, right? They're in a position where they can strangle you with the most efficient strangulation technique, the rear naked choke. What do you do about that? How do you get out of that? It's imperative you know how to improve your position from there. And those positions are probably the most important thing that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu can teach you about self-defense. Is that all you should know about self-defense? No, but that's a pretty good place to start. Know how to improve your position from the worst case scenarios on the bottom. Next question. Our next question comes from Pierre William, who wants to know, do I read the comments? Yes, I do. And secondly, I'd love to have your views on a crossguard being used for MMA. Thanks. Okay, crossguard. It's a variation of a Philly shell or a crab guard. Philly shell, you got one arm here and the lower arm down here. Crossguard, I'm bringing one up here, one down here, essentially creating a little helmet with my arms, protecting my chin, with my shoulder just like the Philly shell, although this arm can come up higher, and this arm kind of over my eyes. I know some boxers will bring it down lower. I like to bring it up here. Okay, I find this this just works better for me. And this is a guard I'll use from time to time in mixed martial arts. I love the Philly shell for mixed martial arts. Deep in the pocket, because that low lead arm can stuff takedowns. You can quickly transition to this cross guard, this crab guard type of thing, and wedge this elbow in to create some openings. It's a good transition into grappling, I find. Now, with any particular guard, I'm not going to just hold it there and camp out there in an MMA fight. Absolutely not. But I'll very quickly transition from, say, a long guard to a peekaboo to a crab guard or a what do we call this, cross guard, to a Philly shell, to a long guard again, etc. So go check out my video on stances. That is something I do use from time to time. Not all the time, but there is a time and a place for most things in fighting. Next. Our next question comes from WWE Metal Fan, who says, I'm not sure if you've answered this yet, but what are your thoughts on personal training for fitness, skill, health, etc.? I know high-level athletes and celebrities benefit from it, but what about the average Joe? Thanks, sir. Well, if you have a good trainer and you have the money and disposition to do personal training, great, go for it. A lot of students and potential students come to me and they say, should I do personal training with you? And I'm like, if you want to, yes. How do I benefit the most, though? Should I take just personal training? Should I take group classes? My answer, yes. If you can, do both. Here's how to get the most from personal training. Come with questions and a specific objective. What happens a lot with personal trainees is they will come in with neither of those, neither an objective nor questions, and they will just expect the trainer to throw some training at them and fix all their problems and make everything bad in their lives just go away, and replace that with fitness or skill. And that's better than nothing, I suppose, but it's much, much better, especially in the context of martial arts. Say if you are paying your martial arts instructor to teach you something, come with a specific objective. For example, if you're taking a group class, a group jiu-jitsu class, for example, and everybody is just tooling you from their guard and you can't pass the guard, and then you show up to your personal training session, maybe you should ask some questions. Hey, coach, can you help me fix this specific problem I have with guard passing? It's not working out when I try, say, underhook pass. Everybody's catching me in a triangle choke. Why is that? Can you help me fix this? Okay, that's a specific question. And the more specific the question, the more specific the answer you're going to get. For example, if you just show up and say, hey, my guard passing sucks, fix it, coach. You're going to get some very general answers about guard passing. But if you come in with something very specific, again, that very specific example, when I try an underhook pass, I get caught in a triangle choke. Why is that? Then you're going to get a very specific fix to that problem. If we don't experience the limitations, we won't ask the right questions. And if we don't ask the right questions, we'll never get the right answers. Next. Our next question comes from Claudio, who says, Ramsey, what kind of conditioning do the Muay Thai guys use in Thailand? I've seen a lot of Muay Thai fighters from Peru, Argentina, Brazil, Spain, the US, etc., but none of them seem to be as fit and tight as the guys in Thailand. I myself I'm an amateur Muay Thai practitioner. And till today, I do not quite understand what they do differently. Even back visiting Thailand, I did not get it. I found them a little slower, but far more durable, with far more stamina. Guys like the well-known Bua Khao seem to be made of iron or something. Could you tell me what you think of it? Thank you. Okay. Claudio, the Thais use the magical power of consistency over long periods of time. That's basically it. How many folks who practice Muay Thai that you know from these Western countries, from South America, from the United States, from Spain, how many of these guys do you know who train since the age of 5 in a Muay Thai camp, twice a day, for 2 decades? How many guys do you know who fit that description? Who 5 or 6 days a week are training 2 times a day, even if it's a little slower and a little more laid back, and then once every 2 weeks or once a week are fighting a full contact Muay Thai fight? How many guys do you know who do that? How many guys do you know who have accrued 200 or even 300 fights by the age of 25? The reason is the magical power of consistency. I've been to Thailand, I've trained there, I've trained with a lot of Thais. A lot of Thais come here to Shanghai to train and work in Muay Thai gyms here. And yeah, I understand exactly what you mean about the way they train. It's very different than in the West. Westerners tend to be more like, we got to get it done, we got to go harder, we got to, right? Whereas the Thai style training, not always, but often, is much more laid back than that, because they're simply doing more of it. And you can't do heavy sparring every single day. You can't. And so if you are training every day, twice a day, sometimes even 3 times a day, you have to dial it back. Man, you have to dial it back. The magical power of consistency is amazing. Back in college, I learned how to juggle. I had no aspirations of being a circus clown, but I took a class in modern dance, improvisation. I have a degree in modern dance, and one of the classes I took for that was modern dance improvisation. And the professor handed out some juggling balls to everybody and said, before we do anything dance-related, the first 5 minutes of every class we will spend juggling. And we all said, we don't know how to juggle. He laughed a little and said, by the end of the semester, you will all be juggling at least 6 balls at the same time. We laughed, haha, that's impossible. He said, try it. So every day, with very little instruction other than basically, try to catch it in the other hand after you throw it up, we practiced 5 minutes a day, and within 4 months, by the end of the semester, myself and every other person in the class could juggle 6 balls at the same time. And I amazed myself. I couldn't believe it. Wow, the magical power of consistency, doing something every day, even for a short period of time, but being consistent about it, yields tremendous results. So what did the Thais do differently? The magical power of consistency is always going to trump the much less magical power of trying to cram a lot of effort into a short period of time. Next question. I recently posted a podcast clip about martial artists hating strong people. And I got a lot of good feedback on that, but I got a number of comments about Bruce Lee. Our friend Tony sent in this comment where he said, when Bruce Lee incorporated weights in his modified Wing Chun and Jeet Kune Do, he became a beast, because he realized that strength improves technique, and also speed improves technique, and stamina improves technique. And yeah, sure, absolutely. Bruce Lee gets a lot of credit for crazy supernatural abilities that he probably did not possess. Bruce Lee is in popular discussions about, oh, he was the most badass fighter ever, he'd be a UFC champion. And I think that type of discussion is very disingenuous to what Bruce Lee actually taught, what he did. One thing he does not get enough credit for is the emphasis he put on strength and conditioning, especially weight training, back in an era where weight training was unpopular for martial artists to do. It has been for a very long time. For the last 150 years, martial artists and combat sports athletes, boxers also, fell into this trap of believing and buying into the old wives' tale that lifting weights will make you slow and muscle-bound and make you a worse fighter somehow. And Bruce Lee was forward-thinking enough to understand, no, being stronger is objectively better. Being a better athlete is objectively better. And so he lifted weights. If you listen to interviews about people who know him, people who lived with him, his wife, for example, she talks about how he had weight training equipment throughout his house so that wherever he was, he could always do something to get stronger. And did he have the best methods? No, but he was trying to figure it out. And props to Bruce, credit where credit is due. He was advocating strength training at this time where everybody in the community, most people in the community, were still poo-pooing that idea. So, yeah, giving credit where credit is due right there. Next. Our next question comes from B8N8, who says, why the USA is one of the countries that wins the most gold medals in the Olympics, but is known for the most fat, unhealthy people? Why? Do they value only the gold, but not the health? And is it normal for a country to put more money in a health system and not in education? I mean, health comes from education. All right, B8N8, those are excellent questions. Yeah, man, I've wondered about that. Why is it that the United States, and not just in the Olympics, but in many professional sports, excels, absolutely excels in these professional sports and the amateur sports in the Olympics, but has a 60% obesity rate as far as the total population? There are some incredibly unhealthy people in America. So Americans idolize fitness. They idolize professional athletes. They put these guys up on pedestals. They are the new polytheistic gods in many ways of American society. The athletes, the superstars in sports, the Olympians. But then you look at the average person and they are unhealthy and sick and fat, and it's very common. Why? I don't have a good answer for you. There's a lot going into that equation. I lived about half of my life in the United States and about half of my life in other countries. And one thing that is always a culture shock for me when I go back to visit the United States is how fat the average person is compared to people in other countries that I've lived in. Man, China especially. Since I've lived in China in the last 12 years, the obesity rate has started to climb here. And I think a big part of that is that the people of Shanghai especially have kind of idolized the American dream. They've tried to replicate the American dream. They've tried to, have what they see in the movies, in these Hollywood movies. Hollywood movies, man, that is the #1 import that China buys from America. So this image that America sends to the outside world of, these godlike physiques, these incredible athletes, these powerful, compelling narratives and stories we see on film, the sci-fi technology, wealth beyond measure, and much of it is a facade. Most of it is the exception and not the norm. But the average person in China now wants that. In much the same way, the average American tends to feel that they are a temporarily embarrassed millionaire, even if they live in a trailer park and have a minimum wage job. This is a question I would love to discuss with a psychologist or a sociology professor. I'm sure we would get a lot of fascinating answers about that. But from my own perspective, why is it more comfortable to watch from afar, to watch an Olympian, than to participate in a sport? Nature loves efficiency. People are inherently lazy. But going back to your original question, how did America get to that point where there are so many gold medalists, so many high-level Olympians and athletes, and none of this is publicly sponsored? And this is something that's very different from many other countries. For example, in China, there are Olympic training centers sponsored by the government where athletes are hand-picked to compete in the Olympics specifically to compete in the Olympics, and they have the best training, the best facilities, the best of everything given to them, paid for by the government to ensure that they have the best opportunity to win those gold medals. And America doesn't have that. America has people who just really, really want to compete, and they pay their own way, often paying through the nose, sacrificing everything else in their lives to get to that point so they can stand on the podium with the medal around their neck. And nobody's financing that in most Olympic sports in the United States. That is a really interesting difference to me. Where you have these guys, of course, the Chinese team, they work very, very hard. But the opportunity in one way is granted to them. The opportunities, the training, everything is granted to them. Their American counterparts are fighting tooth and nail to get the opportunities to train. They are paying through the nose to have the opportunities to train. And this creates a very different type of athlete, I think. One which is entirely self-motivated versus one which is pushed and may or may not be self-motivated. Imagine if you could have the best of both worlds, if you could have those self-motivated guys who pull themselves up by the bootstraps, figuratively speaking, of course. But then they got the push and the drive and the funding. How far could they go? That would be fascinating to see. Next question. Our next question comes from Ryan, who wants to know, could you make a video about your routine when you were actively competing? I wrote back to him and I said this, you'd be bored by it. I worked multiple jobs, 16 hours a day, while trying to find time to sleep and trying to find the money to eat. When I was actively competing, that was a busy time, but not busy doing a Rocky training montage at the gym. It was busy working multiple jobs to pay the bills. And struggling to find enough food to eat just to make weight. And when I say make weight, I'm not talking about cutting weight, I'm talking about putting weight on. Because, man, I was a skinny skeleton of a man because I was poor. That was the real struggle. It would not be a great training montage type of video talking about how I trained when I was competing. It would be more like a sad sob story. So I'll spare you the details. Maybe I'll go into that deeper another day. Next question. Our next question comes from B.F. Galbraith, who said, what rule set did Joseph Smith Jr. wrestle with? I'm asking for a friend. Joseph Smith Jr., if you don't know who that was, he was the first president and prophet of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, colloquially known as the Mormons. But did you know, a lot of people don't know this, both inside and outside of the church, Joseph Smith was a wrestler. He was a very competitive, very athletic wrestler. And he competed in 3 different rule sets. There was a popular style of wrestling, which was simply called wrestling in the area he lived in the eastern United States back then. And it had a very similar set of rules to Chinese folk wrestling, northern Beijing, jacketed style, shuaijiao, where the objective is to throw the other guy on the ground so he lands on his shoulders and no other part of your body except the soles of your feet touches the floor. So that was Joseph Smith's favorite style of wrestling. He also competed in a style called side hold wrestling. There's very little known about this other than it was a style practiced in the eastern United States and the New England area back in the 1800s, in the early 1800s. I have scoured the internet trying to find any information about side hold wrestling, and I can't find anything. Can't find what the rules were, the objective, etc. Just that it was a style that Joseph Smith and other people in that area at that time competed in. And the third style was catch as catch can. It was not Joseph Smith's favorite or preferred style, but he did compete in that style. There were a number of catch wrestlers in that area. There was a story I read. I've looked up this subject a lot because growing up I always heard all these stories about how Joseph Smith was a great wrestler, and this is kind of celebrated inside of the church because everybody wants to believe that their prophet was the best at something, right? So our prophet was the best at wrestling, apparently. Unless you count Jacob from the Bible, who literally wrestled with God. That's a whole different level of wrestling, anyway. But yeah, there was a story, I forget the dude's name, but he was an older gentleman, and he wanted to wrestle with Joseph Smith because he heard Joseph Smith was kind of a badass with the mat moves. But he said, you know what, I think you would beat me with that, throw the guy on his back style of wrestling or side hold wrestling. But even though I'm an old man, I think I could beat you I could beat you with catch as catch can. And they went at it. The rules of catch wrestling, if you don't know, you can win by pin or submission. It's a submission fighting art. So if you pin the guy on his shoulders for 3 seconds, boom, you win. Best 2 out of 3 falls win. A fall is a pin or a submission. So you basically have to beat the guy 3 times in a row. Okay? That's traditional rules, the rules Joseph Smith competed under. And so this old man and Joseph Smith, they lock up, and Joseph's trying to throw him because he was a big dude, especially back at that time. He was about 6'1" and about 220 pounds, which, by today's standards, it's not huge. But back then, in the early 1800s, people were a lot smaller than they are today. So a 6'1", 220-pound man was considered very large in stature, if you will. That was kind of unusual back in the day. So Joseph Smith, big dude, locking up with this much, much smaller, older gentleman who is an expert catch wrestler. Joseph is unable to throw the other guy on the ground, and the older man is unable to submit Joseph, but they kind of lock up and stalemate for a bit. But the older man walks away, and he writes in his journal, kind of smugly, like, silly Joseph Smith, he couldn't throw me. Catch as catch can is too strong. So there are a lot of great stories about that. Now, I'm not entirely sure about this. The folk style that I mentioned before, where the objective was to throw the other guy on his back, may have also allowed submission holds, because there was a story about Joseph Smith wrestling with another strong man, and they locked up, and Joseph caught a hold of an ankle, like he was going for an ankle pick, something like that. But then he hoisted it up with his hips, basically doing a straight ankle lock, and unintentionally snapped the other man's shin in half, which is what happens if you do the Achilles lock to completion. If you're not familiar with that move, there are a couple of different ways to do a straight ankle lock. You can do it by twisting the ankle, or you can do it by applying pressure directly under the Achilles heel, the way Dean Lister teaches it, which will snap the shin in half if you drive your hips into it. So this man's shin snapped in half. I guess Joseph was not expecting the level of power he was putting into it to have that effect. He felt terrible about it and spent the next several days visiting this man, helping him, taking care of him, and so on. Because again, he's the prophet and president of the church, right? And he just broke a man's leg in mutual ritual combat there, in the form of wrestling, which is supposed to be a friendly exchange, right? Nobody's supposed to die, but accidents do happen. So I've wondered if he was just going too hard, if submissions were allowed and the other guy didn't tap, or if he was just going for a takedown and accidents happen, as they tend to do. So yeah, Joseph Smith in wrestling, 3 different styles: catch as catch can, side hold wrestling, and that particular folk style, very similar to Shuai Jiao. Next question. Our next question comes from And the Raisin Tone, who says, Coach Ramsey, at the end of this particular video I'm commenting on, where you were showing off various training clothing, you look rather skinny and lacking muscle, like you have the upper body of a teenage goth. Is strength training something you are currently working on? Cheers. Yes. Next question. Our next question comes from our friend Jeffrey Davis, who says, if a person does not want to compete but simply wants to train in martial arts for self-defense, Is MMA still a good thing for him to learn? Or could a mix of Muay Thai and, say, Judo be a workable solution? Now, I don't consider this a self-defense channel. I don't consider myself a self-defense expert, but I'll give you my take on self-defense. Self-defense is primarily a legal term. Self-defense means violent action that would otherwise be illegal, justified by a court of law. So, your number one self-defense tip: learn the law where you live. And make a game plan with contingencies built around that. After that, become physically fit. Become as physically fit as you can. And here's why. Not only is that good in a physical altercation, but guess what? The number one causes of death in the world are not bad guys jumping out of the shadows mugging you. They are heart disease and stroke. And the number one ways to prevent heart disease and stroke are fitness, exercise, health, good diet, good sleeping schedules, etc. Those will improve your chances of survival far more than the best fighting techniques ever will. After that, if you really are worried about the bad guys jumping out of the shadows on the streets attacking you, plan accordingly. If the law allows it, carry a weapon, be prepared to use it, be prepared to live with the consequences of using it. And train with that weapon. It's not enough to say, oh, well, I would just buy a gun, when you don't actually have the strength to deal with the recoil of that weapon and physically aim the thing and hit anything with it, anything you're intending to destroy anyway. What else? Again, physical fitness. A lot of people say, I would just run away. Well, are you working on your running? How fast are you? How much do you run on a regular basis? If not, if that's your game plan, work on it. In short, what is your game plan? Work on that. Our next question comes from Grappling Friends and about 127 other viewers who want to know my thoughts on Jake Paul versus Ben Askren. Maybe I'll make a dedicated video on this, but the short answer is, meh. I don't have a whole lot of thoughts on it. I think myself and a lot of other people in the combat sports community are hoping that Ben Askren wins because we have a vested interest in the public believing that getting out there and training consistently over long periods of time is better than getting out there and training over short periods of time. So we have a experienced combat sports athlete, multiple discipline champion in Ben Askren against a relatively new amateur boxer who has dedicated so far everything he has done just to boxing. Now, that being said, I want Ben Askren to win because that is validating to me as a combat sports coach, because I feel like he has invested more heavily into combat sports themselves, whereas Jake Paul, because it is a fight, because I do understand how fights work, still has a chance of winning. Do I want him to? No, but at the same time when I say that, I start asking myself, well, why not? Why don't I want him to win? I think if Jake Paul wins, this sends the public the wrong kind of message. It sends the public the wrong kind of message that it's easier than it is. If he wins, if he has put in the type of work it takes to beat an athlete of the caliber of Ben Askren, with that type of mettle, with that type of focus, if Jake Paul does that, the casuals are not going to see the type of work that he has had to put in to do it. And the casuals are going to think, well, if he can do it, anybody can do it. And then people who should probably not be getting into boxing matches are probably going to be getting into boxing matches. And I'm not talking about people who become boxing enthusiasts who get out there and train and make positive improvements in their lives and learn some discipline and health and self-defense or whatever. I'm talking about people who get themselves hurt because they start thinking this is easier than it is. This is less dangerous than it is. This is less potentially harmful than it is. And that would be doing the world a great disservice, I think. So because of that, I don't want to see Jake Paul win. Does that make sense? Even if he deserves it, I don't want to see it. Because, again, the casuals don't see what happens behind the scenes, if you will. Next. Our next question comes from our friend Rob from Texas. He recently took an online seminar about how to grow and maintain your martial arts gym, which contained a decent amount of helpful material. He goes on to say, one of the things I bumped up against, however, was when they talked about student retention. Essentially, they said that the average lifespan of a martial arts student is about 2 years before they get bored and quit. Therefore, if you train in a belt system, you should promote after 3 years of training, as in promote to black belt. Give them a big reward, if you will, thereby guaranteeing another year out of that one student. Now, when I was younger, I thought the entire belt system was stupid. I thought a person's skill was either black belt level or not, regardless of the time spent on the mats. Now that I'm a bit older, I feel that if you do have a belt system and you hold the black belt as a symbol of mastery, authority, proficiency, competency, etc., then you should also have high standards to match. I'm not saying that a person can't become competent in a given style after 3 years, but I feel that a 3-year time limit just to get more money out of somebody is shady. I would love to hear your thoughts, and as always, thank you for the great content. All right, Rob, man, that is an interesting conundrum you have there. Okay, yeah, man, I can see where they're coming from. I kind of hate belts. I've been very vocal about this. I think belts are kind of silly. But at the same time, there is a certain level of respect that I hold for people who earn belts legitimately. So, in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, for example, it's well known as the martial art with the hardest black belt to earn, if you will. A lot of other martial arts, they say, oh, the black belt doesn't, it's just the very beginning, it's the first step, it's the first degree. Okay, and if that's what you want your system to be, cool, whatever. But remember when black belts used to be good at fighting? Where if somebody said, like back in the 70s and 80s, I'm a black belt in karate, that meant something. That meant you actually knew karate, you knew how to punch and kick and do all those karate things, right? And now somebody says, oh, my 6-year-old is a black belt in karate, and they don't even know how to do the forms. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of black belts who are not good representatives of their martial art. I think a black belt in any style should be a good representative of what that style is. Does it mean you should be the best guy ever at that style? No, probably not, but it should mean that you are a good representative of that style. So, for example, if you have a black belt in Aikido, you should be well versed in the Aikido syllabus, and you should be able to show and teach Aikido moves. Right? Am I far off in saying that? If you're a black belt in Taekwondo, you should be proficient in all the Taekwondo kicks and all the Taekwondo forms, and you should be able to do Olympic-style Taekwondo sparring, and you should be able to break some boards and stuff like that. That makes sense to me. If you are a black belt in Judo, you should be familiar with the Judo syllabus and be good at all those Judo throws. You shouldn't be a pushover, man. And with most people, that doesn't come in 3 years. And Rob, it sounds like what they're saying in this seminar is you should lower your standards for belt promotion. And I'm not about that. I don't believe anybody should lower their standards for anything, in any aspects of their lives. And I get it. I've seen many, many students come and go, especially in the city of Shanghai. In Shanghai, the the student retention is even lower because it's such a transient city. People are constantly moving in and out of the city. People will stay here for 3 or 4 months. People will stay here for a year. If they stay for 2 or 3 years, that's pretty good retention. But most people, again, are coming in and out of the city. There is such a huge migrant worker population here, both in terms of Chinese people coming for work and then leaving, and expats coming here for work and leaving. Not as much of the latter now during the COVID-19 crisis, but before that, yeah, man, so many international students would come and they would go. But let's say for a minute you have a gym, maybe in a mid-sized town in a country like the United States, where you have a fairly stable population who stays in that area. They're born in that area, they live in that area, they die in that area, right? And so they want to learn martial arts, they go to this gym, they train for a couple of years, they're starting to get bored, and you're like, well, I'll give him the black belt in my style. I'll give him this coveted black belt so he sticks around for another year so I can milk out another year of gym fees from him before he decides to quit. Because with that black belt tied around his waist, he's going to feel special for at least another year and keep showing up. If you want to run a McDojo and make money that way, I suppose you could do that. Why does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu work? And I'm not talking about as far as fighting, like style versus style, UFC 1 style competition. Why does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu work as far as belt promotion in ways that other martial arts don't? It takes an average of about 10 years for a dedicated student of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu to earn a black belt. It can take a decade. It can take significantly longer. Man, I've been training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for a very, very long time, for a couple of decades now, and my rank is purple belt. And I've been consistently training. Why is it that this martial art is able to retain students for decades without giving them a black belt? How can you get a guy to commit to training daily for a decade, sometimes multiple times a day for a decade, paying his gym fees for a decade happily, and then after he gets that black belt to keep doing it for life? What's different here? We talked about Joseph Smith earlier in this video about what wrestling styles he practiced. One thing he said religiously, he said this: a religion, and I'm making a parallel between martial arts and religions. Bear in mind, martial arts are not religions and they should not be, but I'm drawing a parallel here. Joseph Smith said this, which I think is a very powerful statement about not just religion, but many aspects of our lives. He said, a religion that does not require complete and total sacrifice does not have the power to save. It's a paraphrase, but something like that. A religion that does not ask everything of you does not have the power to save. So if you look at a story in the Bible where the rich young man came up to Jesus and he said, I've been keeping the commandments all my life. What lack I yet to gain the kingdom of God? And Jesus said, sell everything you have, give it to the poor, come follow me. Basically, sacrifice everything. And the young man was not willing to do that. And so he walked away very sad about that whole situation. Okay. Here's the parallel. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, to get that black belt, asks you to sacrifice a lot of time, a lot of attention, a lot of your focus, man. Sometimes your fingers, look at these jiu-jitsu knuckles, man, I can't even put my wedding ring on. I have not been able to wear my wedding ring for over a decade now because of jiu-jitsu, man. It swells up these knuckles big time. I am a musician, I play guitar, and it has cost me mobility in my fingers. I can't play the guitar to the level that I could a decade ago, or 15 years ago, or 20 years ago. I can't physically move my fingers that way because of jiu-jitsu. It has taken a great deal of sacrifice. It has taken a toll on my body in many ways. I've invested heavily into this martial art, just to get to that halfway point, if you will. Because I don't think of it as a halfway point, and nobody really should. If you think of a black belt as, oh, that's the goal, that's the end, that's the special reward, you're robbing yourself of a very important journey. And not just in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but in everything. Easy come, easy go is a very popular aphorism, but there's a lot of truth there. It's the same thing Joseph Smith was saying. It's the same thing Jesus said. Give up everything and follow me. And the young man said, no, right? Because it was too hard. He wanted easy come, because he was an easy go type of guy. What do you really want? Do you want some extra fees from some guys who are going to show up in your gym for a couple of years and then leave you? Or do you want a stable of a bunch of badass black belts to train with? I know which one I would rather have. A group of guys with ranks, or lack thereof, but abilities and experiences that build up and edify everyone in that group to a greater degree. That's what I would rather have. Thank you for your question. Thanks for watching. Now get out there and train. Hey fella, looks like you could use a rash guard. What for, you say? Well, they protect your skin against mat-borne illnesses, mat burn, and they make you look incredibly cool. But where do I get a rash guard from? Hey, have you heard of xmartial.com? Yeah? Then what are you waiting for? Check them out right now. xmartial.com has all kinds of rash guards, from sleek and simple, novelty, badass designs, and more. Channel your inner Japanese cartoon rat monster. Express your love for bad puns and kitty cats doing iconic jujitsu moves. Hey, that panda's gonna hit the other panda with a folding chair like a pro wrestler. And this one makes your right arm stand out. NoGiBJJGear.com is now xmartial.com, serving your needs beyond just no-gi Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, find brand new equipment for mixed martial arts, kickboxing, Muay Thai, wrestling, and more at xmartial.com. As always, use my code Ramsey10 for 10% off everything on the website. Once again, that's xmartial.com. Rash guards, spats, shorts, and more. Links and discount codes in the description below.